Have you ever found yourself in a conversation that just feels off? You walk away feeling confused or frustrated, and you can't quite put your finger on why? Or maybe you keep having the same argument with the same person over and over again. Well, you're not alone. Today, we're going to dive into Eric Berne's incredible book, Games People Play, to pull back the curtain on the hidden psychological scripts that are running our lives. And more importantly, we'll talk about how you can finally break free.
All right, so here's our game plan. First, we'll explore what these hidden scripts even are. Then, we're going to get into something called transactional analysis, which is the key to understanding why we act the way we do. After that, we'll define what these psychological games really are and walk through some of the most common and maybe most relatable ones. And of course, we'll wrap up with how to stop playing and why this stuff is still so incredibly relevant today.
So let's get right to it. What are these hidden scripts? Well, think of them as these invisible rule books that we follow in our interactions. They're the unconscious games that call the shots, often without us even realizing we're playing. But before we can really spot the games, we've got to understand the system they're built on. And that's where something called transactional analysis comes in. Honestly, this is the foundation for everything we're about to talk about. Think of transactional analysis, or TA, as a kind of decoder ring for human behavior. It's a framework that helps us see what's really going on beneath the surface of a conversation. It makes all the weirdness of social interactions a little more predictable and, frankly, a lot more understandable. Okay, so here's the core idea of TA. Berne says we all have 3 ego states we operate from. First, there's the parent. This is like a recording of all the rules and shoulds we learned from authority figures. It can be nurturing, but it can also be pretty critical. Then there's the adult. This is our rational, logical, just the facts self. And finally, you've got the child state, which is where all our emotions, creativity, and spontaneous impulses live. Figuring out which state you're in and which state the other person is in is step 1. Now think about a time a conversation just flowed. It felt easy, productive, right? Chances are your ego states were aligned. Maybe your rational adult was talking to their rational adult. But what about a conversation that went completely off the rails? It probably felt like you were talking to a brick wall. Well, that's what happens when ego states are mismatched. Like, say, you're speaking from your emotional child state and they're responding from their critical parent state. That right there is where the games begin. So, what exactly are these psychological games we keep mentioning? Let's peel back the layers on these unconscious strategies we all pull out of our back pockets to get what we think we want. So Berne defines a game as a pattern of interactions that has a hidden motive and always ends with a predictable and usually crummy feeling. I'm sure you've been in one of these before, where someone asks for your advice but then has an excuse for why every single suggestion won't work. That's a classic game. See, the real goal isn't to solve the problem at all. It's usually about something deeper, like reinforcing a negative belief or just avoiding real connection. And every single game has 3 parts, like a recipe for drama. First, you have the roles people play, like the victim, the rescuer, or the persecutor. Then there's the hidden motive, what the person really wants, like justification or avoiding responsibility. And finally, there's the predictable payoff, which is almost always a familiar bad feeling. Once you can spot these 3 things, you can see the games for what they are, and you can choose not to play. All right, now for the fun part. Let's expose some of the most common games out there. And trust me, you're going to recognize these, whether you've been on the giving or receiving end. First up is a classic, if it weren't for you. You've definitely heard this one. It sounds like, I'd love to finish my degree, but, I can't because of the kids. Or, I'd totally start that business, but my partner just isn't supportive. This game is a masterclass in making someone or something else the reason for our own inaction. It's a way to avoid taking responsibility. And that's the whole point, isn't it? The if it weren't for you game is all about shifting the blame. It doesn't matter if the obstacle is a person, a job, or a situation. It's a convenient excuse that lets us sidestep our own fears and accountability. It keeps us stuck. But hey, at least it's someone else's fault, right? Next up, we have a game that I am absolutely certain everyone listening has been a part of. Why don't you? Yes, but. This is the one where someone presents a problem and you try to help, but they shoot down every single solution you offer with a classic, yes, but. You can see it right there on the screen. Person B is throwing out perfectly good ideas, but person A has a ready-made excuse for every single one. Here's the secret. The real goal of this game is not to find a solution. Nope. It's to prove that the problem is just too big, too special, too unsolvable. It's about getting that weird satisfaction of stumping all the helpers.
Okay, this one has a pretty dramatic name, for a reason. Have you ever felt like someone was setting you up to fail? Like they were almost hoping you'd make a mistake so they could pounce? That, my friends, is the game of Now I've Got You, USOB. The person playing lays a trap and just waits for you to step in it so they can unleash all their pent-up, righteous anger.
This could be that manager who gives you really vague instructions and then gets mad when you don't read their mind. Or maybe it's a partner who keeps a silent tally of every tiny mistake you make, just waiting for the right moment to unload it all on you. At its core, this game is all about power. It's a way to feel superior and justify being angry instead of just, communicating like an adult.
All right, so now that we can see these games all around us, the million-dollar question is, how do we stop playing? Well, the good news is, it is absolutely possible. And it all starts with a little bit of awareness and making a conscious choice to do things differently.
Look, breaking free isn't always easy, but it is so worth it. The first step is just to recognize the patterns. Then it's about making a choice to respond from your rational adult ego state, even when someone is desperately trying to hook your parent or child. When you challenge the predictable emotional payoff and push for open, honest conversation, you take yourself right off the game board. You start building relationships based on trust, not tricks.
You might be thinking, okay, this is interesting, but this book was written back in the 60s. Is it really still relevant? And the answer to that is a huge, resounding yes. The games haven't changed. They've just found new playing fields. I mean, just think about your workplace. How often does office politics feel like one big, long game of Now I've Got You? Or just scroll through social media. It is filled with these subtle games. The dynamics are literally everywhere. But the cool thing is, now you have the tools to spot them. Understanding these patterns is basically a superpower for navigating modern life.
So when you boil it all down, what's the big takeaway here? It's that we have a choice. We can keep playing these unconscious games that just keep us stuck in the same frustrating loops, or we can choose to break free. We can choose to build more authentic, more meaningful relationships through direct, game-free communication. The choice really is yours. So what game are you going to stop playing today?